Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. As we get to the end of the book of Ezekiel, we have this mysterious temple that is being described. And there's a lot of speculation as to what this temple actually is. Some think that it might be an actual physical temple that is to be constructed in the future, while others will see it as more of a spiritual temple, and the language being more figurative. And I lean towards that second interpretation because a lot of the numbers, a lot of the way that the structures are described, the different functions that happen within the temple can all be seen as symbols of what really goes on in the church, and how the spiritual Israel now fulfills these roles in the way that we relate to God in these very figurative ways. And this is consistent with what we find in the New Testament, because we find that we are the temple. The scriptures are very clear about that. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul calls the church the temple of God. In chapter 6 of 1 Corinthians, it talks about us being a temple of the Holy Spirit. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, we're called the temple of God. And time again, the idea of a temple is assigned to the church. And that's a big emphasis in the New Testament. And that was very important because just a few years later, the temple, as it stood at that time, was called Herod's temple, was destroyed in AD 70. And so there seems to be this idea that we now, as God's people, are the temple. And this vision by Ezekiel seems to indicate that, especially when you look at chapter 43, when it talks about the glory of the Lord returning to the temple. If you remember in chapter 10 and 11 of Ezekiel, Ezekiel saw the glory of the Lord departing from the temple and also departing from Jerusalem itself. But in chapter 43, we have the glory of the Lord coming back. And we definitely know that the second temple, the one that was constructed after the exiles returned back into the land, it was built, but we never ever hear about the glory of the Lord actually filling the house. However, when we get to the New Testament and we see in Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2 and onward, when the disciples are gathered together, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit happens there in Jerusalem. And then continuing on through the book of Acts, the Holy Spirit becomes one of the main subjects as it goes through, and it talks about how those in Samaria received the Holy Spirit, and then the Gentiles in Cornelius's household received the Holy Spirit, and this continues on. And so we see through the church now the glory of the Lord resides within his people, and they function in a way that is very similar to this temple. And that might explain why in verse 11 of 43 he says this. He says, if they are ashamed of all they have done, make known to them the design of the house, its structures, its exits, its entrances, and all its designs, and all its statutes, and all its laws, and write it in their sight, so that they may observe its whole design and all its statutes to do them. And so the idea is that this temple wasn't really something to be built, but was something to be observed, which again plays into this idea of it being figurative. And as we think about it, as we see ourselves as the temple, we understand that we are to function as the dwelling place of God on this earth. And just as that temple being described by Ezekiel was holy, so we are holy as well. We're holy, yes, because of the types of lives that we live, and because of our connection to God through Christ, but also because we have the Holy Spirit dwelling in us. And if the Holy Spirit is dwelling in an individual, that makes that individual very holy. And Paul uses that to emphasize how much we should be living a holy life, particularly in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. But then also collectively, as we function with one another as we interrelate with one another, it ought to be that the actions that we take, the service that we give, should all be saturated in holiness and done in a way that honors God and glorifies God. And so as we read about this temple, and this will continue on through the end of Ezekiel, let's think of it in terms of the church and see how it is that we can put these things into practice to fulfill what this temple was to fulfill, and to display the holiness of God on this earth. And as we do that, we will be shining forth the glory of the Lord to all the people around us, and all the nations of the earth will see a church that is glorified, that is saturated with God, and therefore be drawn to the Lord through the temple. So these are some things to think about today, guys. I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.